The crystalline spires of New Genesis trembled as another stellar flare bombarded the planetary shields. Within the central computation chamber, first speaker Zilvoz watched the holographic display with growing despair. Their sun, once a stable beacon of light, now pulsed an angry crimson, its corona whipping violent tendrils of plasma into space. Probability of successful evacuation continues to decrease, first speaker announced third calculator Menblek, her crystalline form dimming with each word. Current projections indicate only 23% of our population could be relocated before total stellar collapse. Zilvo's own crystalline matrix vibrated with uncharacteristic discord. In 50,000 years of recorded history, the Zalaxian collective had never faced a crisis they couldn't solve through pure logic and computational power. Their civilization had mastered quantum mechanics, bent space-time to their will, and even prevented 3 gamma-ray bursts from striking their world. But this defied all rational solution. Initiate Protocol Omega-7, Zilvoz commanded, his voice resonating through the chamber's crystal walls. Maximum computing power to the stellar modeling grid. The chamber hummed as billions of crystalline processors synchronized, their combined computational potential rivaling a small star's energy output. Data streams flickered through the transparent walls, turning the entire room into a 3-dimensional representation of their solar system's death spiral. Time to total stellar collapse, Zilvoz asked, though he already knew the answer. The calculations had been run countless times. 73 standard cycles, Menblek responded. Margin of error, 0.03%. Another tremor shook the chamber. Outside, the sky had taken on a perpetual rusty hue, New Genesis's once pristine atmosphere increasingly ionized by the dying sun's radiation. In the streets below, younger Zalaxians hurried about their assigned evacuation duties, their forms flickering with the efficiency of pure logic. Current survival calculations, Zilvoz asked, his tone perfectly measured despite the gravity of the situation. The processing chamber pulsed red. 0.0001% probability of species survival, Menblek announced. This factors in all known variables, including potential rescue by spacefaring civilizations within range. Zilvoz initiated his species equivalent of a sigh, a momentary frequency shift in his crystalline matrix. Begin mass hibernation protocols. We will preserve what we can. The order rippled through the collective's communication network. Across the planet, billions of Zalaxians began preparing for suspended animation, their bodies transforming into pure crystal structures that would theoretically survive even the death of their world. First speaker, Menblek interrupted, her usual harmonic tones showing slight distortion. The young ones are questioning the decision. Questioning. Zilvoz's form shimmered with concern. That is highly irregular. The calculations are absolute. They suggest that our models may be incomplete. Menblek's discomfort was evident in her flickering luminescence. They propose continuing to search for alternatives. With what purpose? The calculations. A violent surge of radiation cut through their shields, temporarily disrupting the chamber's computational matrix. Warning signals flashed through every crystal surface as their sun belched another massive solar flare. Shields at 62% capacity, Menblek reported. Degradation accelerating. Zilvoz accessed the planet's monitoring systems. Already, thousands of his people were entering hibernation, their bodies joining the crystalline architecture of their cities. Soon, New Genesis would become a tomb of living crystal, preserving their consciousness until either rescue or the final end. The young ones will comply, he declared. Logic dictates no other course of action. We have computed every possibility, tested every theory. Our fate is, he paused, accessing a term from their xenolinguistic database, written in the stars. As if in response to his words, the sky outside blazed crimson once more. In the streets below, the last active Zalaxians began their hibernation preparations. Soon, Only the essential monitoring systems would remain active, watching over a planet of sleeping crystal as their sun approached its final devastating transformation. High above New Genesis, unnoticed by the planet's sophisticated detection grid, a small ship emerged from hyperspace, its hull bearing markings unlike anything in the collective's vast databases. Junior researcher Zetal hadn't meant to discover the alien ship. In fact, by all logical protocols, she should have already entered hibernation with the others. But something in her crystalline matrix resonated with discord, refusing to accept the inevitability of their calculations. She stood alone in the auxiliary monitoring station, her form casting prismatic patterns across the crystalline consoles as another solar flare lit up the crimson sky. The station's sensors chirped in alert. Something had triggered the outer detection grid. Impossible, Zetal muttered, her crystalline fingers dancing across the light interface. All neighboring species have already abandoned this sector. The sensor readings defied conventional analysis. The object was small, barely larger than a Xylaxian transport pod, but its whole composition wasn't registering in any known materials database. More bizarrely, it was navigating the severe solar winds with unprecedented precision. "Computer, enhance scan resolution," she commanded. The crystal walls hummed in response, channeling more power to the sensors despite the strain on their failing shields. The results made her matrix flutter with disbelief. The ship's hull was somehow deflecting radiation levels that would melt even their most advanced crystal alloys. Its propulsion system operated on principles that contradicted three fundamental laws of physics, at least the laws as the collective understood them. A communication signal pulsed through the static. "This is Lieutenant Jessica Walker of the U.S. Montana, United Earth Exploration Force, requesting contact with planetary authorities. Anyone still awake down there?" The casual nature of the transmission sent harmonic disturbances through Zetal's matrix. The pilot's neural patterns, now visible on her scans, showed activity that should have been impossible in a functional brain. Regions activating simultaneously that, according to all known xenobiological models, would cause immediate cognitive collapse. "Detecting your signal, U.S. Montana," Zetal responded, her harmonic tones automatically translating to audio frequencies. "This is junior researcher Zetal of the Xylaxian Collective. I should inform you that you've entered a dying system. Survival probability is calculated at 0.0001%. A sound came through the speakers that made Zetal's entire form resonate in confusion. The human was laughing. "Yeah, I'm picking up some pretty angry readings from your son," Lieutenant Walker replied. "Mind if I dock somewhere? Looks like you folks could use a fresh perspective." Before Zetal could explain the illogic of the request, the human ship executed a series of maneuvers that their traffic control systems classified as aerodynamically impossible. The vessel corkscrewed through a series of solar wind eddies, riding the plasma currents like they were gentle waves rather than civilization-ending forces. "Fascinating," Zetal whispered, her scientific protocols overriding the standing order to hibernate. "Central Command, requesting permission to." Her transmission cut short as she remembered. Central Command had already entered suspension. She was possibly the only Xylaxian still fully active in this sector of the city. The human ship settled onto a landing pad adjacent to the monitoring station, its hull crackling with dispersing energy. Zetal watched through the crystal walls as the vessel's airlock cycled, revealing a figure in what appeared to be woefully inadequate protective gear for their environment. Lieutenant Walker stepped onto Xylaxian soil, her environmental suit decorated with worn patches and what appeared to be completely non-functional aesthetic elements. She removed her helmet, exposing herself to the radiation-heavy atmosphere, and smiled. Another meaningless muscle contraction that nonetheless caused unexpected harmonics in Zetal's sensor readings. "Your atmosphere's a bit spicy," Walker said, checking a primitive-looking device on her wrist, "but nothing worse than what we get during solar storms back home. Now, about that dying son of yours." Zytal's logic protocol screamed for her to either enter hibernation or at least report this to any remaining active authorities. Instead, she found herself resonating with an entirely new frequency, one that their emotional recognition databases would later classify it as hope. "Lieutenant Walker," she said, her crystalline form shimmering with decision, "I believe you should see our latest stellar calculations." Above them, the dying sun flared again, as if in protest of the impossible possibilities suddenly taking shape in Zytal's quantum consciousness. The central computation chamber had never seemed so small to Zytal. As Lieutenant Walker paced its crystalline floor, her boots making sounds that sent confused ripples through the sensitive quantum matrices. The human had insisted on seeing their stellar calculations, but instead of displaying the expected horror at their thoroughness, she kept making that unsettling expression with her face muscles, smiling. "So let me get this straight," Walker said, stopping to tap a holographic representation of their dying son. "You've tried everything in your considerable mathematical playbook, and the best odds you've calculated are a fraction of a percent. 0.0001%, Zytal corrected, her crystalline form vibrating with mild distress at the human's casual attitude. "Every possible variation has been computed. The calculations are absolute." Walker's laugh echoed through the chamber, causing several dormant crystal processors to accidentally activate. "You know what humanity's greatest scientific discoveries have in common? They all started with someone saying that's impossible, and someone else saying, 'Hold my beer.' I don't understand the relevance of preserved grain beverages to our situation," Zytal admitted, her confusion creating rainbow patterns across her surface. The human's expression shifted to something their emotional recognition software failed to categorize. "It means sometimes you have to do something crazy to get amazing results." Walker turned to face the main stellar display. "What if we could use your son's death to save you?" The chamber's crystalline walls vibrated with collective shock as the few remaining active Zalaxians processed this statement. First speaker Zilvos, who had been roused from early hibernation for this meeting, actually developed a visible crack in his outer matrix. "Use the very phenomenon that threatens our extinction." Zilvos' tone carried harmonic frequencies of disbelief. "That is beyond impossible." "It is." He searched for an appropriate term. "Madness." "Exactly." Walker's enthusiasm made the quantum processors glitch. "Look here." She began drawing on the holographic display with her finger, leaving traces that shouldn't have been possible in their hardlight system. "Your son's not just dying. It's building up to a very specific type of collapse. What if we could trigger it in a controlled way?" Zytal found her scientific protocols engaging despite her logical objections. "The energy release would still destroy our world." "Not if we channel it." Walker's fingers danced through the hologram, rearranging stellar decay models with casual disregard for their computational complexity. "Your entire civilization is built on living crystal, right? The most sophisticated quantum computational matrix I've ever seen. What if we used your entire planet as one giant energy conductor?" The remaining Zalaxians began resonating at frequencies that threatened to shatter their forms. The human was suggesting they turn their entire world, their very bodies, into a conductor for stellar forces that defied containment. "Running preliminary calculations," Zytal announced, unable to resist the scientific imperative. The chamber's processors hummed as they modeled Walker's proposal. The results appeared in crystalline clarity. "Probability of success, 0.000001%, Zilvos announced. "Even worse than our current survival chances." "That's because your computers can only calculate based on known physics," Walker countered, that unsettling smile growing wider. "But what about unknown physics? The kind that happens when you push the boundaries of what's possible." Unknown physics. The concept sent discordant ripples through every Zylaxian present. One cannot calculate the unknown. It defies logic. "Exactly." Walker slapped her hand against a crystal wall, causing every Zylaxian to wince. "That's where humanity thrives. We're the masters of the unknown, the champions of let's try it and see what happens. Zaital watched as Walker began sketching out a plan that violated 17 fundamental laws of physics, 32 principles of stellar mechanics, and every safety protocol the collective had established in 50,000 years of civilization. The real question, Walker concluded, her eyes reflecting the crimson light of their dying sun, is whether you're willing to embrace a little human chaos to save your world. Through the chamber's walls, they could see more and more Zalaxians emerging from hibernation, drawn by the impossible frequencies emanating from the computational matrix. Their crystalline forms shimmered with something new, an emotion that their vast databases had no name for, but which humans called desperate hope. Lieutenant Walker stood before the assembled Zalaxian Council, their crystalline forms creating a symphony of refracted light across the emergency chamber. She had insisted on waking more of their scientists from hibernation, claiming that more minds meant more chaos, and chaos was exactly what they needed. "Your mathematical models are perfect," Walker said, pacing the crystal floor. "And that's exactly the problem. The universe isn't perfect. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes that's where the magic happens." She pulled a simple metal coin from her pocket, drawing confused harmonics from the assembled Zalaxians. "Watch this." She flipped the coin high into the air. "Predict where it lands." First speaker Zilvo's crystals pulsed with instantaneous calculations. Given the coin's mass, air resistance, angular momentum, and gravitational constants, it will land approximately. The coin landed and rolled, taking an erratic path across the crystalline floor before settling against a wall. Every prediction had been wrong. "Impossible," whispered Menblek, her form flickering with distress. "We accounted for all variables." "Did you?" Walker grinned. "Did you calculate the microscopic imperfections in the floor? The exact temperature differences between the metal and the air? The quantum fluctuations affecting each atomic particle? The butterfly flapping its wings on Earth 3 weeks ago?" Zaital's scientific protocols engaged with sudden understanding. Chaos theory. The butterfly effect. Small changes creating cascading consequences. Exactly. Walker's enthusiasm sent ripples through the quantum matrices. Now apply that to your son. You're trying to predict and control a chaotic system with perfect math. But what if instead we embrace the chaos? She gestured to the stellar hologram, where their sun writhed with increasingly violent flares. Each of those plasma eruptions creates quantum fluctuations. Your crystalline forms can detect and respond to quantum states. What if, instead of trying to control the sun's death, we ride it? The chamber hummed as hundreds of Zalaxian minds processed this concept. Zaital stepped forward, her young matrix vibrating with new frequencies, like surfing a wave. Walker's eyes lit up. "You know about surfing. We studied Earth's recreational activities." The concept seemed highly illogical, deliberately writing a chaotic system for fun. "But surfers don't control the wave," Walker pressed. "They feel it, adapt to it, become part of its chaos. Their success rate isn't calculated, it's intuited." She pulled up the complex equations governing their sun's decay. With quick gestures, she began marking points where small variations could cascade into massive changes. The Zalaxians watched in horror as she deliberately introduced variables labeled gut feeling and seems about right. "This is madness," Zilvoz protested. "You cannot quantify gut feeling." "That's the point," Walker laughed. "Watch this." She initiated a simulation using her modified equations. The crystal processors struggled, trying to compute outcomes for variables they couldn't fully define. Then something extraordinary happened. The simulation didn't fail. It evolved. Quantum fluctuations in the crystal matrices themselves began influencing the calculations, creating feedback loops that spawned new possibilities. The processors, freed from the constraints of perfect logic, began exploring solutions that existed in the spaces between mathematical certainties. Young Zalaxians like Zytal found their forms resonating with these new patterns. Their perfectly ordered crystalline structures began developing tiny, beautiful imperfections, chaos fractals that enhanced rather than degraded their computational abilities. "Our models are changing," Zytal announced, her voice carrying new harmonics of wonder. "They're becoming more like life," Walker finished. "Messy, unpredictable, adaptive. Living things don't survive by being perfect. They survive by embracing imperfection and making it work for them." Through the chamber's walls, they could see their dying sun painting the sky in apocalyptic hues. But now, in the quantum dance of chaos and order, the Zalaxians began to see something new in those violent flares, not just destruction, but possibility. "The calculations still show the plan is impossible," Memblek observed. Walker's smile took on a fierce quality that sent shivers through every crystal in the room. "Good. That means we're finally on the right track." "You're all thinking too hard," Lieutenant Walker announced to the gathered young Zalaxians in the auxiliary research chamber. Their crystalline forms sparkled with new, irregular patterns, evidence of their growing comfort with imperfection. "Sometimes you need to let your mind wander to find the answer." Zytal, her once pristine matrix now laced with beautiful chaos fractals, watched as Walker set up what she called a brainstorming session. The concept had initially seemed nonsensical, deliberately allowing thoughts to scatter like weather phenomena. "But how can we calculate the correct answer without focused computation?" asked Remvor, a quantum mechanics specialist whose crystal structure had begun developing spiral patterns. "That's just it," Walker said, sketching rough diagrams in the air with the holographic interface. "We're not looking for the correct answer. We're looking for all the wrong answers that might accidentally be right." The chamber's walls pulsed with confusion frequencies. Outside, another solar flare bathed the city in crimson light, a reminder of their dwindling time. "Watch this," Walker continued. She projected an image of their sun's deteriorating core. "Don't analyze it. Don't calculate. Just look at it and tell me what it reminds you of." "It resembles a failing quantum matrix," said one young researcher. "I see patterns similar to crystal growth structures," offered another. "It looks like..." Zytal hesitated, her form flickering with uncertainty. "It looks like a heartbeat." The chamber fell silent. Comparing their sun to a biological process would have been considered highly irregular just days ago. But now, the younger Zalaxians found their matrices resonating with new understanding. "Exactly." Walker's enthusiasm sent ripples through their quantum fields. "A heartbeat isn't perfect. It speeds up, slows down, adapts to what the body needs. What if we stopped trying to control your son's death and instead tried to work with its natural rhythm?" The young researchers began calling out ideas, their crystal forms pulsing with increasingly irregular patterns that somehow made their thoughts clearer rather than more chaotic. "We could use the solar flare's own momentum. The plasma ejections create quantum tunneling opportunities. The crystal matrices could synchronize with the stellar oscillations." Walker moved among them, encouraging what she called wild ideas and crazy connections. The chamber's computational crystals, designed for perfect mathematical modeling, began adapting to process these new types of thoughts. Suddenly, first speaker Zilvos entered, his perfectly ordered crystalline form creating a stark contrast to the chaos-embracing younger generation. "What is the meaning of this disorder?" he demanded, his harmonics razor-sharp with disapproval. "Your patterns are becoming corrupted." "Not corrupted," Zytal countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Enhanced. Look." She interfaced with the chamber systems, demonstrating how their new irregular patterns allowed them to process quantum information in ways their previous perfect structures couldn't match. The chaos fractals in their matrices weren't flaws. They were evolutionary adaptations. "Impossible," Zilvos whispered, but his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "Impossible is just where things get interesting," Walker said, stepping forward. Your young researchers here have made more progress in understanding your son's decay patterns in the last few hours than your perfect models did in months. Want to know why? She gestured to the assembled young Zylaxians, their forms shimmering with newfound confidence. Because they've learned to think between the numbers, to see patterns in chaos, to trust their crystalline equivalent of gut instinct. They're becoming something new, something that combines the best of Zylaxian precision with human adaptability. Through the chamber's walls, they could see more young Zylaxians emerging from hibernation, drawn by the unusual harmonic frequencies. Their perfectly ordered society was transforming, crystal by crystal, thought by thought. The sun's core is accelerating its decay, Zelvos announced, clinging to familiar protocols. We have less time than calculated. Good, Walker replied with that unsettling smile. Because I think your young ones here are ready to try something completely unprecedented. The chamber hummed with new frequencies as the young researchers' crystals resonated with an emotion that their databases were finally beginning to recognize: excitement. The main quantum core of New Genesis buzzed with unprecedented activity. Lieutenant Walker stood at its center, surrounded by a growing number of young Zylaxians whose crystalline forms now sparkled with chaos patterns. Above them, through the transparent crystal dome, their dying sun painted everything in deep crimson hues. The core's normal configuration is too rigid, Walker muttered, studying the quantum matrices with an expression Zetal had learned to recognize as deep thought. We need to make it more jazz. Jazz. Remvor's crystal structure flickered in confusion, the earth musical form characterized by improvisation and syncopation. Exactly. Walker's eyes lit up. Traditional orchestra follows a strict score. Jazz follows feeling. We need your quantum core to stop playing classical and start playing jazz. Before any Zylaxian could process this unusual metaphor, a massive solar flare rocked the city. Warning signals flashed through every crystal surface as their shields struggled to cope with the intensity. Shields at 38%, announced Memlek from her monitoring station. Structural integrity of outer crystal layers beginning to degrade. But Zetal noticed something strange in the sensor readings. Lieutenant, look at this pattern in the shield harmonics. The human rushed over, her movement causing ripples in the quantum field. As the shields strained against the solar assault, they had begun resonating in unexpected ways. The crystal layers weren't just blocking the energy. They were dancing with it. That's it, Walker exclaimed. Your shields aren't failing. They're adapting. The crystal matrices are naturally trying to synchronize with the solar frequencies. The chamber hummed as young Zylaxian minds processed this revelation. Their shield technology, like everything in their civilization, had been designed for perfect protection through absolute resistance. But under extreme stress, the crystals were exhibiting new properties. Quick, everyone interface with the core, Walker commanded. Don't try to control it. Feel its rhythm and add your own. One by one, the young Zylaxians connected their consciousness to the quantum core. Their modified crystal structures, now rich with chaos patterns, created new resonance frequencies. The core's rigid computational grid began to shift and flow. First speaker Zilvaz burst into the chamber, his perfect crystalline form radiating disapproval. Stop this immediately. You're disrupting the core's primary functions. No, Zetal countered, her voice carrying new harmonics of certainty. We're teaching it to evolve. Through their combined interface, they could see it happening. The quantum core, heart of their computational civilization, was developing its own chaos patterns. Calculations weren't just running in parallel anymore. They were interweaving, creating new possibilities in the spaces between certainties. Look at these readings, Walker said, pointing to the holographic displays. Your crystal technology isn't just computational. It's alive. It can learn, adapt, even intuit, if you let it. Another solar flare struck, more powerful than the last. But this time, something extraordinary happened. Instead of straining against the energy, the shields began to pulse in harmony with it. The entire city's crystal structure resonated in a complex pattern that shouldn't have been possible according to their mathematical models. The shield efficiency is increasing, Memlek reported, her voice carrying unexpected emotion. It's dancing with the solar flares. Walker smiled that fierce smile that had become familiar to them all. Jazz, baby, your whole city is learning to improvise. Through their connection to the quantum core, the young Zalaxians could feel it. Their civilization's crystal technology, evolved over 50,000 years of perfect mathematical progression, was awakening to new possibilities. The rigid structures were becoming fluid, the perfect computations giving way to intuitive leaps. "We're ready," Zytal announced, her form shimmering with newfound power. "Ready to attempt your impossible plan." Walker nodded, her expression serious for once. "Good, because we're out of time. Your sun just entered its final phase. It's now or never." Above them, the dying star blazed like a wound in space, its corona writhing with forces beyond comprehension. But for the first time since this crisis began, the Zalaxians weren't trying to comprehend it. They were learning to feel it. The central spire of New Genesis trembled as the sun entered its death throes. The sky had become a churning maelstrom of plasma, magnificent and terrifying. Lieutenant Walker stood before the assembled Zalaxian Council, her environmental suit's indicators flashing urgent warnings about the increasing radiation. "This is madness," First Speaker Zilvoz declared, his pristine crystal form reflecting the crimson chaos above. "You propose we link every living Zalaxian into a single quantum matrix. The energy surges would shatter us." "Your people are already shattering," Walker countered, gesturing to the gathered young Zalaxians with their beautiful chaos patterns. "But instead of breaking, they're becoming stronger, more adaptive, more alive." Zytal stepped forward, her crystalline form pulsing with newfound confidence. "The quantum simulations confirm it. If we synchronize our patterns—" "Simulations," Zilvoz interrupted. "Your models are corrupted with uncertainty, riddled with what the human calls gut feelings and intuition. You cannot base the survival of our species on such imprecision." The chamber shook as another solar flare struck their shields. Warning signals flashed through every crystal surface. "Shield integrity at 22%. Critical failure imminent." "We're out of time," Walker announced, her voice cutting through the harmonic discord. "Your perfect calculations say you're doomed. Your flawless models predict extinction. So what do you have to lose by trying something imperfect?" The chamber hummed with the resonance of thousands of Zalaxian minds processing this logic. More were emerging from hibernation every moment, drawn by the unprecedented frequencies emanating from the quantum core. "The plan is simple," Zytal explained, interfacing with the holographic displays. "We link our consciousness through the city's crystal matrix, creating a quantum network powerful enough to channel the sun's death throes. Instead of fighting the chaos, we become part of it. But the energy requirements," Memlek began, "are impossible." "Yes," Walker finished. "Just like it's impossible for a species to evolve from single cells to spaceflight. Just like it's impossible for a planet of quarreling primates to unite and reach for the stars. Just like it's impossible for a crystalline species to learn to dance." She turned to face the council, her expression fierce. "Humanity's greatest achievements happened because someone looked at the impossible and said, 'Watch me.'" Through the crystal walls, they could see the sun beginning to collapse, its core compressing in ways their models had never predicted. The very fabric of space-time was starting to warp around their world. "Choose now," Walker commanded. "Die perfectly, or live imperfectly." Zytal felt it first, a ripple through the quantum field as young Zalaxians began linking their consciousness, their chaos-enriched patterns creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible. More joined every second, their combined resonance growing stronger, more complex. First Speaker Zilvoz watched as his perfect society transformed before him. The crystal spires of their city began to pulse with new light, order and chaos dancing together in patterns that defied mathematical description. Even the most conservative elders felt their matrices responding to the song of possibility. The sun's core is collapsing, Menlek announced, her own form beginning to shimmer with irregular patterns. Quantum cascade imminent. Walker looked to Zilvos, her eyes reflecting the light of their dying star. Last chance, first speaker. Perfect death or imperfect survival. What's it going to be? For a moment that stretched into eternity, Zilvos stood motionless. Then, slowly, beautiful chaos patterns began to form across his crystalline surface. Begin the convergence, he commanded, his voice carrying new harmonics of uncertainty and hope. The quantum core pulsed with power as billions of Zolaxian minds linked together, their consciousness flowing through the crystal matrices of their entire civilization. Their world became a single vast quantum computer, running on mathematics and intuition, logic and faith. Above them, their sun began its final collapse, its power beyond any calculation. But for the first time in their history, the Zolaxians weren't trying to calculate. They were ready to dance. The universe held its breath as the star died. In the quantum network that New Genesis had become, billions of crystalline minds moved in perfect imperfection. Their consciousness flowed through matrices that defied traditional physics, guided by calculations that danced on the edge of chaos. Lieutenant Walker stood at the heart of it all, her environmental suit's sensors overwhelmed by energies they were never designed to measure. Through the crystal walls, she watched their sun begin its final death spiral. Core collapse initiating, Zytal announced, her form now a symphony of order and chaos patterns. Quantum resonance at maximum capacity. The first wave hit them like a stellar hammer. Space itself seemed to bend as forces beyond comprehension crashed against their crystalline shield. But instead of shattering, the shields began to sing. It's working. Walker shouted over the harmonic crescendo. Your city isn't just channeling the energy. It's transforming it. Through their linked consciousness, the Zolaxians could feel it. Their perfectly ordered world was becoming something new. The crystal spires didn't just reflect light anymore. They bent it, shaped it, danced with it in ways that their old mathematical models would have deemed impossible. First speaker Zilvos, his once perfect form now gloriously marked with chaos patterns, interfaced with the quantum core. The stellar mass is approaching critical threshold. Prepare for the final surge. Their sun's core collapsed in an instant that stretched forever. A wall of energy beyond measurement rushed toward New Genesis, carrying enough power to shatter planets. But the Zolaxians weren't trying to resist it anymore. They were surfing it. The quantum network pulsed with newfound power as billions of minds worked in chaotic harmony. Crystal matrices that had once processed pure mathematics now calculated with intuition, feeling the waves of probability like ancient Earth sailors reading the sea. Now, Walker commanded, her voice carrying through both audio and quantum frequencies. Ride the wave. Space twisted. Reality buckled. The crystal city blazed with energies that should have torn it apart, but instead flowed through it like music through an instrument. Every Zylaxian consciousness joined in the symphony of survival, their combined will bending physics itself to their need. For one eternal moment, New Genesis existed everywhere and nowhere, riding the quantum currents between spaces that their old sciences had never dreamed existed. They were pure energy, pure thought, pure possibility. Then, with a flash that would have blinded lesser beings, they emerge. A new sun burned in the sky above them. Steady, stable, perfect for their needs. New Genesis hung in orbit around it, transformed but unbroken. The crystal city sparkled with colors that hadn't existed before their quantum metamorphosis. We did it, Memlek whispered, her form shimmering with emotions their old language had no words for. But we're different. She was right. Every Zolaxian had been transformed by their journey through quantum fire. Their crystalline forms now contained impossibilities, patterns that existed in multiple dimensions, structures that thought in chaos mathematics, surfaces that reflected light from futures that hadn't happened yet. "You're not just different," Walker said, grinning as she studied their new forms with her suit's sensors. "You're evolved. The first true, quantum crystalline life forms in known space." Zytal interfaced with the city's systems, marveling at how they now operated on both mathematical and intuitive levels simultaneously. "Our computational abilities have increased beyond measurement. But more importantly," she paused, searching for the right words, "we can feel them." First speaker Zilvos, his transformed form now a testament to the beauty of imperfection, addressed his people through their enhanced quantum network. "For 50,000 years, we sought perfection through pure logic. In our final hour, we found something greater: the perfect balance between order and chaos." Walker looked out at the transformed city, its crystal spires now alive with possibilities that even she couldn't fully comprehend. "So, what's next for the new and improved Xylaxian collective?" The quantum network hummed with billions of thoughts, each one unique, yet harmonizing in ways that created new patterns of possibility. Their civilization had been reborn, not just in body, but in spirit. They had learned to dance with chaos, and the universe was their ballroom.